J. Clifton Derr of 1005 Thomas Avenue, North Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, 29582. Clif's phone number is area code 803-272-8353. The recording was made by Jim Walkinshaw on January 2nd, 1989 at Clif's home in North Myrtle Beach. This is tape number 1 of 2 tapes. So Clif, if I could just get you to start with your name and address and phone number, if you would, here.
Well, my full name is J. Clifton Derr. I live in North Myrtle Beach at 1005 Thomas Avenue. Our telephone number is 272-8353.
What's your zip code over here?
29582.
Okay, great. Then
Okay.
Clif, maybe if you could just take us back to when you started at Oldsmobile. When did you hire in, and where, and what was going on?
Well, I first got a job at Oldsmobile in 1928. I was in college, and I had stayed up in East Lansing with a lady, and her brother was superintendent of the open body shop.
Okay.
And he put in a requisition for me in June of 1928, and I went down to the personnel building, which was a low frame building at the corner of Division and Olds Avenue.
Okay.
I worked for him in the open body shop for a short time.
What were you doing there?
Well, I was pretty inept, having never had any
Sure.
this type work. And the thing that I remember was we were involved in making the holders for the bows that formed the support for the top.
Okay.
And we worked in small groups, and they had some kind of bonus arrangement, and if you met certain quotas, well, you made a little more money or something like that.
Okay.
And the fellows were all looking at each other, trying to help each other.
Okay.
And I remember I worked there until they had a model changeover, or a change, and then I was transferred to Stores B, which was over in, I thought it was building 19, but I'm not positive.
Okay. Where was, just back up for a second, where was the open body shop? Do you remember?
Yes, the open body shop was at the corner of Division and the street that goes up, let's see.
Is that Elm Street you're thinking?
Elm Street, yeah.
Maybe?
It's the corner of, the southeast corner of Elm and Division.
Okay, right next to where the what would have been called the administration building? The one with the
Yeah.
little pointy roof?
No, as I recall, that administration building, it wasn't far down from the plant gate.
Okay, all right.
And that was Olds Avenue, you see.
Okay.
And this was down at Elm Street.
It's on another block.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that huge smokestack that used to stand there was north of where I worked, as I
Oh,
recall.
it was north of where you worked?
Yeah.
Okay,
Mhm.
all right. So you were actually down and back kind of in the middle of the plant almost?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And
How many, when you mentioned you worked as a team, how many guys would have made a team, so to speak?
seems to me something like 8 or 10, something like that.
And this was all woodworking?
No, they had me, my first job that I recall was riveting a piece of stripped steel with the little knuckle that had to be riveted into a hole there that would hold the bow thing that
All right. So you were actually working with metals then?
Most of the time. But they had both there because they were the bodies were made of wood and of metal. Later, John Curtis, I guess, became superintendent of the sheet metal department, and as I recall, he was still there when I came back after some years after that.
Did the operating people in the plant actually did the hiring, so to speak?
They could requisition people that they wanted to hire.
Specific person for a specific job.
Yeah. Yeah, that must have been it, because otherwise I probably wouldn't have been. You have to get started somewhere.
That's right.
In life.
Do you remember what you made?
No, I don't. I remember something about the hourly rate over in Stores B, and it seems to me it was 65 cents an hour.
Okay.
But
what did you do over at Stores B, Clif?
Oh, you unloaded from trucks. They had conveyors that came down from the platform where the trucks unloaded to that basement level.
Okay.
And we unloaded all sorts of things, such as kegs of bolts and nuts and rivets and cotter keys and such items, and then we opened those and put them into metal pans, and then these small factory trucks would come in and pick those up and take them up to the assembly line and place them at strategic places.
Okay. Was that all manhandled, or did you use fork trucks?
Yeah, they were taken up the assembly line by fork trucks.
But out of the trucks?
No, well, they would come down the conveyor, and we would have a hand truck to handle them.
Okay.
And we'd push them around. Now, there were other items that came in there, and the biggest item I remember was boxes of floor mats. They weighed 700-800 pounds.
Oh my goodness! Rubber things.
Yeah, and they were in wooden boxes, and we used to have a great time getting those off of that conveyor and over to where they could be stored in aisles. I remember that because it was tough.
Those were get 10 guys on it or something and move it around.
You usually had about a couple of guys to steady it and a couple of guys with the hand trucks.
Oh, okay.
Then a little later, I was hooked up with a guy by the name of Raleigh, somebody, and we went up to the other end towards the personnel office.
Okay.
In that same building level, and we unloaded wheels from motor wheel that came in by truck. And
were those all just loose in the back of the truck?
Yeah, they were piled up, and we used to pile them in stacks, and we knew just how to pile them, and had to pile them just right on account of the brake arrangement that was on the wheel.
The brake drum was already on it?
Yep.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
Yeah. And then the front wheels didn't have that type of. But then they before.
Those are all wooden. Excuse me for interrupting. Those are all wooden wheels.
All wooden wheels. And then before I left there, they had wire wheels come in, which were fastened together in bundles of 4.
All right.
And we sort of hated to see them come because that was a heavy thing. But by the time I got through that job, I was pretty well developed muscularly.
I can imagine.
Because we piled those wheels, and you had to have one in each hand and put them up on that pile higher in your head.
Did you pile those horizontally or standing vertically, the wheel?
Horizontally.
It's kind of stacked like
Yeah.
up in a cone or something?
Yeah, well, you could have a post or something at the end to hold them up there.
Ever have a pile tip over?
No, no, we never did, to my knowledge. But things got pretty slow.
Okay.
See, I started in June, and around December, things were awfully slow. And I went home for Christmas, and I had heard of jobs opening up over at Durant plant, which is now Fisher Body.
Yes.
So, and I found out that there was a foreman who lived just around the corner from me. I was staying at 708 South Pine Street with 3 other fellows that worked at Oldsmobile, Raleigh Shook in engineering, and Guy Wyrick, who's on hourly. But Guy worked his full time out, I'm sure. He lives out in Holt. And his mother kept us as room and board. And I forgot what I was going to say. Anyway, I stayed there, and then I got this job over at Durant in the cushion department.
Okay. What year would that have been then?
That would have been in 1929,
29.
January.
January 29.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I worked about 6 months at Oldsmobile, and went over there and worked until June, and went back to summer school.
Okay.
And went on and finished school.
And what did you do in the cushion room over there?
Well, I spit tacks. I was trimming bucket seats. They had those little seats, and separate seats for 2-door sedans.
Yep.
And there was a small line, and there were about 10 of us on that line. And they taught me how to spit tacks.
So you were tacking the material to the framework?
Yep.
Oh, darn. Where was that in that building? Do you remember where that was?
Third level.
Up at the north end, would it have been?
It was more in the middle of the building, I'd say.
In one of the wings that stuck out from the side? Or was
No,
it
was right on Verlinden.
Right on the Verlinden side.
Yeah. And we worked in there, and I made good money there, and they worked us overtime. And I made pretty good money, as I recall. But in June, the management was changed all around, and a group of guys came up from Dodge, and they cut our rates and so that we weren't making what we had been, and so that's when I quit and went to, I say I quit. When they announced the cut in rate and everything, the fellas they wanted us to work overtime yet, and it was funny. They said that we would have to work up to 8 o'clock or something, and the fellas didn't want to work. We had no union then, of course, but they just didn't want to work for less money and have to work overtime and all that. So we stood there, and I was just standing there waiting for something to happen. And being a little impatient, I guess, I said, "Well, are we going to work or aren't we?" And a little short guy right in front of me that I hadn't seen said, "You're not going to work, you're going home." And
Who was he?
Well, he was a new boss.
He was a boss.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
So that's when I went back to school.
That got you back to school, huh?
Yeah.
Very good. That's all right.
Yeah, and that's all I said.
Uh-huh.
Those were very words.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. But,
So you went back to MSU again?
yeah.
Okay.
Went back to MSU and graduated in '31.
Oh boy, right in the middle of the mess.
I got a job at Kroger then. Worked for them a couple of years, and then I got a job with the government when Roosevelt got elected with HOLC, Homeowners Loan Corporation. I worked
What did you take out at school?
business ed.
Business ed. Okay.
Yeah. I started out taking music.
Oh really?
Yes.
Okay.
But I changed after I had worked in the plant. I could see that I wasn't going to make a very good music teacher, so I switched and used my music as a minor and went to school two summers and graduated. But then after I worked for HOLC from 1934 to till I went to work for Oldsmobile.
Okay.
Which was, I applied for a job as soon as I was transferred back to Lansing. I'd been up north and I had territory up north.
Part of the government had sent you up north.
Yeah, and they transferred me back, gave me the Jackson territory, would let me live in Lansing because we had a house there. But I applied in the fall of 1940 and went down and cooled my heels for a while until Doc Brown got ready to talk to me.
Who was Doc Brown?
Doc Brown was somebody interviewed for salary payroll, apparently.
Oh, be darned, okay.
And I knew him, and he knew who I was because we were in school out at MSU. But I guess that was the way he operated. I don't know. He wasn't around there too long, as I recall. But he took my application, and I said, well, I don't think that'll ever amount to anything. I went back to work, of course, with HOLC. Well, by golly, in about the 1st of May, 1941, got a call from a fellow by the name of Arthur Sandberg, who was assistant controller then. And he wanted to talk to me, so I went down and he hired me right there.
I'll be darned.
Yeah. He had my application.
Yeah.
And I was hired to be supervisor of taxes and insurance.
Amazing.
Yeah. And I worked for John Bell, who was assistant treasurer and supervisor of salary payroll, taxes and insurance.
Okay.
But I was still supervisor of taxes and insurance, and that ground Mr. Bell to no end.
Okay.
He just didn't like it at all until he finally got it changed. So that he came to the door of the office one day, and I was working there, and he said, "From now on, you're a senior clerk."
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I wonder how that happened. I mean, why would they make it a supervisor right off the bat like that?
Because Sandberg had an idea of organizing a separate tax department from salary payroll. Of course, all I did was sit in the same office with John Bell and his secretary. And we finally had another man to help, but that was about the extent of it, as long as Mr. Bell was there. And John Bell was a very fine gentleman, a Christian man, very active in the Methodist Church. And but when he got on edge, boy, you knew it.
How did he?
He didn't treat me badly.
Okay, he treated you well.
Yeah, he was very kind to me in showing me what to do, because I hadn't been doing any accounting detail, and I'll tell you, it was so bad. He put me on a job where I was adding a 14-column figure paper, and I had to make them balance across and
down to the coffin corner.
Yeah, you bet. And that was a tough job for me, and
it was all by hand.
Oh, you had an adding machine.
Yeah.
That you punched and
pulled the lever.
Pulled the lever, as I recall. But And it bothered me no end that I couldn't get those to come out, and so I would get up early in the morning and go down there and go in and go to work at like 5:30 or 6 o'clock in the morning and work on that stuff, and so that I could get it done. And he'd come in, he'd think I'd just got there. I never told anybody that I did that. But I wanted to make good at Oldsmobile because I wanted to keep going.
Was that the same kind of taxes, like things that you were working on in later years, or did it have things to do with people taxes?
Oh yes, we made the entries for all of the Social Security taxes.
Okay. Those kind.
Yes, and also the property taxes and the insurance premiums on the plant. And
so you're really dealing with not only the plant but the people side of the thing too.
Yes, and we always did until I left.
Okay.
The thing wasn't nearly as involved as it finally got to be, but
see, in those days, people have insurance, did they, on themselves and that sort of thing? Did the company offer that sort of thing?
The group, they had life insurance.
Group life insurance.
Yes. And shortly after I started work there, Blue Cross Blue Shield was installed.
Okay.
And I went down in the personnel department where Raleigh Person was and helped him for a couple of weeks or better getting that thing set up. And that was some job because they had little cards, as I recall, for hourly people and salary people to register and their dependents and whatnot, and they had different premiums for single employee or employee and wife or employee and family, and you had to get those all organized, and it was quite a job to get that set up.
And you had to go through the whole plant, get everybody started.
Yeah, it was voluntary, as I recall, but we got it started, and Raleigh and his lady there that worked for him took care of it after I went back up to my job.
See, where was your office at that time, Clif?
I was working right next to the center offices in Building 60 on the 3rd floor there, and it was right next to Sandberg's office, and then the comptroller and assistant were there.
Okay. Who was the comptroller then?
Earl Schoen had just been made comptroller after the death of Frank Sander.
Okay.
And the day I went to work there, I believe at May 8th, I got on the elevator and the fellows were going to his funeral. Of course, I didn't know who
didn't know who it was.
But that was when Earl Schoen started being comptroller, I guess.
Who were the assistant comptrollers? Do you remember who those guys might have been?
There was only one. That was Arthur Sandberg.
Okay, that was only one. Then.
Yeah. And of course.
What kind of a guy was Sandberg?
Well, he always was good, friendly to me, but he had ideas that he wanted to put across, and of course he and Mr. Bell didn't get along very good.
Okay.
But I think Sandberg was a pretty good organizer, and he was trying to set up the accounting department because the company was just getting involved in defense work, and we had to set up 2 sets of books for that. You had to have a separate set of books for all of the defense contracts, and then you had the commercial side and the automotive. Well, eventually, of course, there wasn't any automotive. They quit making cars, and it was practically all defense. But we still had the sales department and the administration, part of the administration, and this and that was charged to commercial expense.
Did you get involved in any of the war contracts at all?
No, I was just on taxes and insurance, and I received figures from property department how to allocate the taxes according to their assets and so on. And I used to make journal entries in pencil, and Mr. Bell's secretary, Mrs. Dadson, he kept her pretty busy, and I said to myself, well, I didn't hire in to be a typist. And so I would go up and down the hall trying to get some girl to type my journal entries. And I usually wound up with Dorothy Little, who was Denny Taylor's secretary. Denny Taylor was supervisor of general accounting.
Okay.
And one of the fellows that helped me a great deal when I was starting there was Harold Osterly, who was supervisor of general ledger at that time. And I felt like he was a good friend, and he helped me considerably. I remember Dane Hoover was, I believe, in the cost department, and yeah, he was cost department. Stan Sessions worked for him. Mike Boughton was in accounts payable, a supervisor.
Yeah.
And the general manager was S.E. Skinner, and Dave Ralston was sales manager, and A.H. Brandel was works manager.
Okay. How did the accounting department manage itself in those early days? How did they do it with meetings, or how was information disseminated from group to group and individual to individual?
Well, there may have been meetings. I didn't attend.
You were not attending any, they didn't call mass meetings or group meetings, any of those kinds of things?
No.
Okay.
But there must have been meetings of supervisors that I didn't know about.
Okay.
And being a senior clerk then, I was.
Well, right, yeah. Right.
But as soon as Mr. Bell left, why, they gave me the title of supervisor of taxes and insurance.
When did he leave?
He worked. I worked for him 5 years, and I retired. They let him work an additional couple of years for the past 65.
That must have been unusual in
Yeah,
those days.
I think that he may have worked until he was 68. The reason being that he was so old when Social Security came in and the pension plan that he wasn't going to get very much of anything, so they let him work. And I think he would have retired just a couple of years after I hired in.
Okay.
If he'd have retired at 65.
So he left somewhere around, let's see, you hired in 41, so this would have been about 46 or so when you left.
Just about.
How big was the department, was the tax and insurance group at that time, Cliff, in 45, 6? Was it more than you?
Yes. Bill Murphy worked for me for a while.
Really? Okay.
And a fellow by the name of Tim Ankney. But Tim was transferred out into the plant as the war work slipped off. But Bill worked for me for a while, and then he went into defense accounting. And he went on from there.
So the department was, what, 2 or 3 people?
Yeah. There would have been another man and another girl while Mr. Bell, just before Mr. Bell retired.
All right.
Because we finally had to have somebody to do some typing for us.
Yeah.
And Helen Early worked in there for a short period of time.
Okay.
Yes. I think she helped out when Mrs. Dadson was on a leave or something.
And all of your calculating was done with the old hand, with the handle?
Well,
Did you have electric ones at that
yeah,
point in time?
we had electric calculators. They were big.
Uh-huh.
We used to have, there was one brand, I forget what it was, they called it a nuts and bolts, because that's just what it sounded like. Grind it out.
Clatter.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
But, yeah, the electric stuff was beginning to come in. I had an electric adding machine, and but a lot of fellows were still using those comptometers.
Oh, okay. Uh-huh.
And they finally phased those things out.
Uh-huh. Was it more of a ladies' profession, or was it a...
Yes.
It was.
Yeah, the ladies did that, and they in the cost department, and also down there, accounts receivable.
Mm-hmm.
Seems to me that Bob Driver was supervisor of accounts receivable. Then they had 4 or 5
Okay.
they
4 or
had
5 machines?
4 or 5 machines in the west end of the wing there. The general accounting section and accounts receivable was located on the 3rd floor at the north end of Building 60.
Okay. In that big room?
Yes.
Yeah, all right.
And those girls, we call them bookkeeping machines. They would put those sheets in and type something and put them back into the tub. But a lot of stuff done by hand.
Yeah,
then.
yeah. When did you get involved in the land business that you later got involved in? Or was that going on kind of right from the start?
No. We kept the records of all of that stuff and had copies of the deeds and leases and all that sort of thing, but I really never got too involved in that because Schoen wanted to handle it himself.
He was the guy that did most of the land.
Yeah, well, a lot working with the rest of
the
management. And he never, he would let me do little pieces of this or that or something. Earl Schoen was always seemed to be interested in me and was all right, but he was hard to let go of something. Says, you know, some people can't delegate as well as others.
Yeah.
Roy Lee was like that.
Okay.
He could not delegate. He would rather do it himself.
Huh.
But I never had any trouble delegating.
That's the way it should be.
Anyway, I remember he retired, and when Dick Elliott came on the scene, he just sort of left it up to me to, well, how about this and how about that, and I had to get my heels kicking and keep up. And
so the method of managing there made a significant change.
Yes. Yeah.
Did Earl Schoen manage the whole accounting department in that same manner, little bits and pieces?
Well, I don't think so. I don't know. I don't think he could, but that was just something that he was interested in, I'm sure, and so he just hung on to it.
Yeah.
And he kept the records of projects, I think, in his office until finally they started a property project control department. And,
see, now, Dick Elliott, I can't remember when Earl Schoen retired.
He retired in 1968, I believe.
68?
Yes.
Okay, and so Elliott came then.
Yeah.
And Elliott delegated significantly more. And so how did he then were you then now attending get-togethers with him to to have
Yes.
information dissemination?
Yeah. I didn't always go to the meetings, but quite often I did, and we would go up to Gold Coast up there, where Rollis's office, and there would be somebody from your department or somebody from. It would be a regular meeting. Of course, we bought a lot of land while I was there.
Sure did.
All the blocks of houses from Townsend Street up to Logan Street between Main and Olds Avenue were purchased.
Yeah. What were some of the? We must have had some interesting occurrences during all of that. Can you remember any of those or recount any of those?
Yes. See, I worked closely with Argonaut Realty representatives that would come up, and they would send a man up and negotiate with these owners of the houses to buy their place. And their aim was always to pay a little bit higher than market value so that these people could go out and buy a place. Many of them were colored, and they needed to have some money to go out and buy something so that they could relocate. But one of the fellows from Argonaut went up to the restaurant one day there on Olds Avenue and got to visiting with somebody, and I don't know whether he tipped his hand or what, but then a couple of those people started buying up properties out there and holding up General Motors for as much as they could in prices. They were just making money hand over fist. But it was funny. General Motors would buy property all around them and tear the houses down and let their houses sit there. And just as the last minute, they'd cave in and buy their places because they had to happen. But I remember they had a contractor in there tearing down houses, and darn if he didn't tear down one of the houses that we didn't own.
Oh, my Lord. What happened with that?
Nothing much.
Oh, really?
No.
The house must have been vacant?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because if somebody was living in it, that would be a shock.
Yeah. Yeah. One of those, there were two of them. One's name was Hudson. I forget what the other fellow's name. The other fellow was more active in this stuff than Hudson. But the poor guy, got, what is this disease that black folks get?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I know, but I don't know the name of it. Yeah.
He died.
Bonham.
Bonham.
Yeah. Vince Bonham.
Vince Bonham.
That's
That's
the
right.
guy's name.
Yeah. You remember that?
Yeah. Bonham and Hudson and Valhacus. Seems like Valhacus was another guy who
Yeah.
was a problem.
Yeah. He was as bad as Bonham.
How about, do you remember when we bought the restaurants like Sal's and the Regent and...
We bought Regent and those buildings on that corner when they were going to build a building there for Building 90.
Assembly plant.
Yeah.
Was that any kind of a hassle, buying commercial kinds of things?
Oh, they paid a good price for it, but I don't think they were held up like they might have been. I can't recall the prices, but I'm sure if they'd have been unreasonable, I would recall.
And we had that big old school up there that we had to buy. The Lincoln, was it the Lincoln School?
Lincoln School, yeah. I had to buy that. Bought that from the school district.
Do you recall any kinds of difficulties with that sort of thing?
No, had no
That went
difficulty. That was all pretty well cut and dried. It was handed to me. This is it.
And then I remember the little old church up there that
Isn't
is
there?
still there.
Yeah, that's
That,
Friendship
Baptist Church.
Baptist
that's
Church.
it,
I remember going up there and huddling with those board of elders in the little room in the back there one Monday night, and they asked me if we were going to buy their place, you know.
Mhm.
I said, well, possibly eventually. I said, if you are thinking of moving, why, maybe you need to buy some land out somewhere.
Yeah.
I don't know if they ever did.
Yeah, it was evidently just too much for the amount of space that was left.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That church is still there.
Oh, yes, yeah, still there.
I remember a little building that was just a small church, and a fellow from Argonaut came up one day and he says, "Come on, I want to show you something." And we drove up, and I think we were looking at some property, but we stopped in front of this little church.
Mhm.
And it had a sign on it, and I took a picture of it. And you know, I can't find that picture, but the sign says, Original Church of God, number 2.
Number 2. Right.
I always got a chuckle out of it.
Yeah.
And then we bought a lot of property west of Logan Street on out to, in fact, out to where Olds Avenue
Mhm.
comes up into Main Street.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a long period. I enjoyed that sort of thing. I, of course, got out of the detail of taxes and insurance and had Bob Wood to work on it, and of course, Bill O'Shalley worked a while. Bill was transferred to Detroit. The director of the tax section called up one
Mhm.
day and said they needed a man. Did I have anybody I could recommend?
Mhm.
I said, yeah, I got a fellow I'd recommend. And he went down and they hired him in the tax section. Well, he worked a while there at various things, and then they started a more extensive government relations department.
Mhm.
And he got switched into that. Well, finally he was writing down facts and practically writing speeches for some of the
Oh, yeah.
executives
Yeah.
down there.
Yeah.
And he made trips to Washington
Oh, my
and all
goodness.
around.
Yeah.
Well, he's now director.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
When did you retire, Cliff?
April 1st, 1974.
74. Boy, it doesn't seem like that long ago, does it?
My last day worked was February 22nd.
Uh-huh.
I've been, see, 73, we came down here on that golf package
Mhm.
for a week. And I knew I was going to retire in the spring, and I went to a real estate office and rented a furnished house down on the beach for the 4 weeks of March.
Mm.
And we came down and stayed then, and then I was playing golf all alone. We didn't know a soul.
Sure, yeah.
I went over to the golf course over there at Myrtlewood, and I drove up one morning, and the fellow was changing his shoes in the back of his car there. He said, "Good morning." "Good morning." He says, "Are you alone?" "Yes." "How would you like to play with us? We got a threesome."
Hmm.
This man was from Canada, and out on the golf course, he said, "Where are you living?" I told him. He said, "How much you paying?" I told him. He says, "You're paying too much." He says, "I want you to go with me after we get finished here and you see what we have." So he took me to a motel, and they had a double unit. One unit was 2 bedrooms and bath, and television and
Mhm.
so on. The other one had a small kitchenette and bath and 2 bedrooms.
Mhm.
And you could eat in the living room. It had a living area, which you could make up a bed in there if you wanted.
Mhm.
$8 a day.
$8 a day.
We had 2 TVs, 2
Things
telephones.
have changed slightly.
Yes, they have. But we came down
Yeah.
3 winters,
Yeah.
and we finally bought a condominium in '77.
Yeah. Cliff, what do you think maybe was the most significant thing that happened at Oldsmobile during the time that you worked there? From your perspective, at least.
I hadn't thought of anything like that, but of course, we did quite a job during the war.
Okay.
Everybody, of course, was, wanting to help the war effort. They were making 3 different size cannons for aircraft, and the ammunition for it, and airplane parts, and I remember I was selling savings E-bonds. We'd have bond drives every so often.
Okay.
And I would sell those for cash. People would come in the office there.
Uh-huh.
But that wasn't all that significant, but I just happen to remember.
It seems like I saw something about somehow our money that we bought bonds with turned into like airplanes, or a specific airplane, or are you aware of any of those things?
No, none of ours. It was strictly bonds, Series E bonds.
Uh-huh.
They were sold for a $25 bond for $18.75.
Yeah, that went on for a long time.
It went on for a long time. Yeah. And we, of course, had payroll deduction too, but they would have these bond drives in addition to that.
Uh-huh. Was there pressure on people to buy, or was that just a lot of advertising, so to speak?
They tried to encourage people to buy if they possibly could afford it.
During the war, apparently a lot of the guys went off to war. Did we then have a lot of ladies working in the plant?
Yeah, that's when the ladies really started working out in the plant. They never got over it.
No. Did that create any particular problems that you remember seeing?
No, I used to hear a rumor once in a while, but I never knew if it.
Yeah.
But I don't think women probably did as good a job as the men do on the average.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, some women can work a lot faster than men with their hands.
Sure, got smaller hands and
Yeah.
can do some things better.
Yeah. So I expected that. And of course, back from the time I started working, women could get a job if they were unmarried. And that sort of carried along until, boy, when things got tough, why they needed more people, and they put women in the jobs.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember we all worked hard.
A lot of war slogans and those kinds of things
Yeah,
around
yeah.
to try and
All
keep
kinds of
people-
signs and posters.
Okay.
And they would give citations for departments that met certain quotas and that sort of thing. But it was quite an experience.
Who was maybe the most, if you were to think back to all the bosses you had, Cliff, who was probably the best boss you ever had?
Dick Elliott.
Okay.
He treated you like a man.
Was Ed Vogt there when you left or not?
He'd been in a month.
Oh, a very short period of time.
And I hadn't been in his office, well, hardly in his office. I think he called me in once or twice, asked a question. But, no, I didn't work for Ed Vogt. See, Elliott retired at the end of January, and I retired 22nd of February, so I was glad that it happened just that way.
Yeah.
Of course, they sent my fellow in 2 weeks before I retired to learn the job.
With the usual finesse.
And I told him he was going to have a hard time holding the department together unless he fought for it.
Yeah.
But of course he didn't have the experience that I had. And I've heard repercussions about that. They left me on that job too long.
Yeah. It was a long period of time, rather unique to start there, and so to speak, and stay there.
They used to have college kids come in, work in the summer for experience, you know. And they'd interview, or they'd send them into your office in groups and explain what you did and so on. I had a group in there one time, and I was talking about how I started as supervisor of taxes and insurance, and I said, you might say I've never had a promotion. Well, boy, did they look at me.
They thought, what happened here?
But I kept getting changes in titles and advancing. Well,
any other unique events that you can think of, Cliff?
No, I don't know. Let's see. I don't know whether it's of any interest. When I hired in May of 1941, the salary personnel department, the hourly personnel department, and the medical department was all on the south end of Building 60 and the basement level.
Okay.
Doc Gunderson was in the medical department, and he had his stethoscope on my chest, and he kept listening and listening. And he says, you know, you've got something there that isn't just right, but I'm going to okay you for work. You probably were born with it.
Oh.
And he was absolutely right.
Really?
Yep.
Oh, darn.
Yeah. Because in '81, I had a kind of a real batch of trouble with that.
Really? Sloshy valve or something?
No, it's irregular heartbeat.
Oh.
It just got to a point where it wasn't doing the right thing. So I had to, I finally went up to Columbia to the hospital up there. Altogether, in 12 months there, I spent about a couple of months in the hospital.
Ooh.
At different periods.
Yeah. No fun.
Yeah. But I'm okay now.
That's what counts.
Yeah.
That's what counts.
Yeah. Every time I go for a checkup every 6 months, and the doctor, one before this last one, said, I wish I was in good a shape as you are. My test showed as good.
That's the way to have it.
Yeah.
That's the way to have it. Well, okay. Anything else, Cliff, on your little list there that you can see that we may have not covered? Did you ever have any dealings with S.E. Skinner himself?
We may have handled his personal car insurance.
But you never knew him enough so you would know how he did things?
No.
Okay.
When I first hired in, Jane McFadden came running into Mr. Bell's office, and of course I was sitting right there, and she was all excited, something about Mr. Skinner wanted this or something. And after she walked out of the office, I turned to Mr. Bell and I said, well, who's Mr. Skinner? Is he God or somebody?
I bet you learned who he was in a hurry.
Yeah.
See, was Jane at that point in time, was she Earl Schoen's secretary?
Yes, she was.
Yeah.
Yep. I liked Louis Church when he was supervisor, or assistant comptroller. He was the kind of guy you could go in with a question and get an answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you went in to see Earl Schoen and asked him a question, would you get an answer?
I never quite had to do that.
Okay. How about
much.
Bell?
Oh, Mr. Bell was on a visiting basis, more or less. Yeah. He was very religious. I couldn't smoke in the office.
Oh, is that right?
I was smoking.
Was it all non-smoking?
No, just his office.
Just his office. Interesting.
I used to have to go out to men's room.
Any of the ladies smoke at that time?
I suppose they did. I don't remember. Yeah. But I had a lot of fun at Oldsmobile. I liked the job. Enjoyed going to work every morning.
That's what counts.
Yeah.
Saw a lot of changes.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't have asked for any happier place to work. I never tried to knife anybody in the back, and very few times it happened to me.
Who was maybe the most interesting personality you had to work with?
Well, it depends on a little on the personalities. Bill Murphy was a good fellow to work with, and he had a sense of humor that you enjoyed. And Eileen Marin came, her name was Eileen Fuller then, came to work for Mr. Bell after Mrs. Datson left. And she was a beautiful girl. In fact, the sales department used to come up and get her to go down and pose for car
pictures.
Yeah. And then after a while, we had another girl come in. We had a series of part-time deals in there, I guess. But Eileen Mariner worked for me after Mr. Bell left. She was there like 15, 16 years. And she got married and had youngsters. And she didn't come back to Oldsmobile. She's pretty sharp. She got a job in the office at one of the principals of school. So she went to school the same hours as the kids, and went home, had summer off when the kids did.
Well, some people like to do that.
Yeah. I hear from her every Christmas. Yeah.
So that's nice. That's nice. Well, you think we've kind of run it in the ground?
Well, getting back to interesting people.
Oh, okay.
Bill Oshalik was probably the sharpest dude that I've ever ran into.
Okay.
He graduated from the University of Wisconsin. Came to work there at Oldsmobile, and I don't know how he come to get in my place. I don't remember. But apparently got him because he was available.
Sure.
And he did a lot of things for our department. The federal excise tax was finally turned over to us after Hallie Harkness left. Hallie Harkness was supervisor of General Ledger after, I don't know when that was. But he made the federal excise tax return. And at that time, that tax was not only on cars, but on parts and accessories.
Oh, okay.
And to figure out the tax on parts and accessories was really a blinger.
Mess, yeah.
You just hardly could get it right.
Mm-hmm.
And the best you could do was the best you could.
Mm-hmm.
And I turned that over to Bill O'Shalik, and I said, this is almost impossible to get right, and this is the way we've been doing it. And he set up worksheets and so on, did a fine job. And he had a fellow that's as intelligent as he has a great memory.
Yes, that's very helpful.
Oh, you bet. And he could tell you anything that happened back last year or the year before.
Mm-hmm.
Except one time after he'd gone to Detroit, Bill Robinson was working in there.
Mm-hmm.
And we had an audit. And, this guy came up with about $340-some thousand that we owed in taxes that he thought we hadn't paid. Well, I called up Bill O'Shalik, and he, of course, had been away from
Recording of J. Clifton Derr made on January 2nd, 1989 at his home in North Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. This is tape number 2 of 2 tapes. Okay, anyway.
Bill Robinson had been transferred down as assistant controller, or gotten to be, and he couldn't remember how it worked. And Bob Wood, I guess, either he didn't know what they were talking about or something, I don't know. But we had a meeting in our office, and Bill Robinson was in there, and Bob Wood, and I don't know who else. And this fellow was just about ready to leave with his assessment. And I couldn't figure out why we hadn't paid the tax, and I said, well, look, we thought we were doing this thing right, and I told him, I said, we set up these cards, and we all of the purchase orders cleared through our department, and we told them whether the things on the order were subject to federal excise tax, and to bill it if they were, and those that weren't, they were exempt. They were either commercial commodities or that. And I said, now we had some parts that we used to put into kits. We sold those as kits. But we paid the tax to the supplier on the taxable parts in those kits, and the nuts and bolts that were common items were free of tax. He looked at me, tore up his sheets.
Really? That was
Yeah.
the whole reason?
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
And walking down the hall, and he says, I didn't know you knew that much about federal excise tax. He said, you always turn me over to some guy out there in the office, and I thought you didn't know anything about it.
You surprised him.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all right.
That fellow retired from the Internal Revenue and went out to Las Vegas.
Did we have very many of those kinds of things where we had to deal with like the IRS, others?
Oh, yeah.
That happened fairly regularly?
Oh, yeah, they came in and audited our federal excise tax in good shape. Of course, after they discontinued the
Yeah.
tax, why we had no
Yeah.
problem with them. But they used to come in and check some items with general ledger for income tax, but generally that was all handled in central office.
Mhm. How about the local property tax business?
Well, we used to have to submit reports of assets for our personal and real estate.
Mhm.
And each spring of the year, two fellows from the tax section in Detroit would come up, and I'd go with them around to the assessing officers of the different places where we had plants, which meant Lansing Township and down at the city there
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
Lansing. And we could
Delta Township eventually.
Delta Township. So we had those three to deal with. And, the guy out in Delta Township got so he was pretty tough with us. He never would give an inch.
Mhm.
But we got along pretty good with the rest of them. But we also had auditors for sales and use taxes, business taxes. We had several different business taxes, like in the state of Washington they had one, Portland had one, Oregon, and West Virginia had one.
And how did we get involved in those taxes? I mean, because we sold cars there?
It was tax on the sales.
Interesting.
Yeah, buying and sales. And well, every time those got laws were first passed, and I was sort of young supervisor, I thought, well, holy cats, we shouldn't have to pay this just right off out of our pocket, so I'd have them bill a surcharge on the car billing, you know. Until that went along for a while, until finally somebody called it, some dealer, I guess, called up the president's office down in Detroit.
Grumbled?
Yeah. He called up and says, no, sir, none of that anymore.
Well, you would think it was part of doing business. I mean,
Yeah.
it does seem like he ought to eventually pay for it.
But I remember they were adding up like $4 a car out
Uh-huh.
in Washington or somewhere
Yeah.
out that way. Seemed to me that was Harlow Curtis.
Oh my goodness. Probably was.
But we used to be audited by all those outfits.
Mhm.
Of course, the state of Michigan would come in every 6 years, and they had to walk out of there with a bill of $60,000 or something like that, and they'd be there for 6 months
What were they doing?
auditing sales and use tax for Michigan.
Oh my Lord.
Yeah.
They would just, would you know those people were going to arrive, or would they just arrive?
Oh, they'd generally call up and say they were coming. Maybe call up Thursday and say they'd be in Monday or something.
And then we had to provide them with all of the, whatever they asked for?
Yeah. And they would go through our accounts payable files and all of the invoices for stuff that was billed out to dealers for advertising materials and all that sort of thing.
My Lord.
And all of the stuff that we bought for office supplies, everything. And it was funny. Every time they'd come in, they'd have a change in the regulations.
Now, would we know that ahead of time?
No.
Big surprise.
Yeah. So that's how they pick up their $60,000.
And the central office guys didn't understand that or know that, so to speak?
Oh, sure, they knew it.
They knew it.
There was nothing that could be done about it. Commissioner of Revenue for the state of Michigan would decide this or that, or an administrative ruling, and what are you going to do?
Interesting.
But I managed to get along with those fellows pretty good because we'd sit down and review all of their sheets that they had listed. And you weren't worth your salt unless you could get them to knock off at least half of it, or better.
I imagine there were a lot of things in there which would be contestable.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it could be here, it could be there.
I remember one of the larger items was when they built that addition to the engine plant. They would be building 28 or somewhere.
23, maybe.
23, yeah. I took the tax guys over there and showed them that was all manufacturing area and that the air conditioning was necessary for
The process.
the process and all that. No way, yes, you had to pay tax on that.
Really?
Air conditioning, all the
Yeah.
installation.
The ductwork.
Ductwork, the whole thing. That was new.
Yeah.
Well, I think that
Okay.
about covers it.
All right. Well, I think it's a good job, Cliff. A lot of good, interesting stuff.